Welcome to the Monday Monologue. This week we're going to talk a little about why do we like tube amps. And I think there's a variety of reasons that many of us are drawn to these, especially after we've listened to them. And I think part of it, at least for me, is the nostalgia of just tube gear. I was born in like 1959, and in the early part of the 1960s, there was still a lot of tube gear. I think all the televisions at that time were tube stuff, and most of the radios were, and I know we had several old consoles that had tube gear in them, and I remember this one that was downstairs. I wish I still had it. It had a tube shortwave, AM, and FM. It had like 8 different frequency bands you could tune into, and I remember always looking in the back of it and seeing the tubes glowing and stuff, and just being someone that likes mechanical and electronic stuff, I just always thought that was such a cool device. And there was the usher in of the solid state stuff, and everybody was like, oh, this is great, no more tubes, you don't have to worry about taking tubes out, taking them up to the drugstore and testing them and replacing tubes and all that stuff. And it really was the start of the space age when we got away from everything having to be vacuum tubes. But anyway, seeing stuff like this old globe tube amp, it just kind of brings back the feeling of another time. And I think that's a big part of why people like these and why they want these amps where the tubes are visible and they're not like hidden inside the amp. Because I know most of the hi-fi gear that was in the 1960s, it really didn't look any different than the later solid state gear, except it had like a big vent in the top, and the tubes were in the heat came up through the grill on the top of them, but they were really trying to enclose everything, and they had like a faceplate, and they didn't look like this at all. And so I think there's must be something about seeing the tubes that really makes people want to use these. Now, I also believe that vacuum tube amps sound better. They've just got a really nice sound to them. It's maybe not as accurate as a good solid state amp, but I'm not kidding. Everybody wants to say they're warm. It's not even that they're warm. There's just something really analog about the sound that comes out of them. And especially the tube phono stage, listening to vinyl, is just, to me, it's just sublime. It really sounds good. And I've built several of those EAR 834 preamps for friends of mine, and everyone is blown away just plugging them in, the change that it makes in their system. And so there definitely is something there for the sonic signature of tubes that adds just life to a system that solid state just doesn't have. And I think I've mentioned before, when I first got back into vinyl, I tried, I just need one of these little, $85 phono stages or phono preamps to hook it up to my tube amp. And man, it sounded like garbage. I mean, it was really bad. And it was like, man, I don't remember turntables sounding this bad. I mean, I feel like there was a jump between listening to, my turntable and my first CD deck. And now thinking back, I was using the solid state phono stage that was in my Kenwood amp that I had at the time, and that was probably why it didn't sound as good as the CD player did. It wasn't the vinyl, it was the phono stage in the integrated amp was just kind of there to be there. It wasn't a main part of the system. And if I'd have known what I know now and spent some money on a really nice phono stage, probably could have got a serious improvement in the sound quality of the system. But didn't know any better. I mean, I didn't even know that was a thing. And I wouldn't have known that was a thing without the internet and doing some testing on my own. So after I tried this really cheap phono stage off Amazon, I did spend about $600 and got the solid state phono stage that gets rave reviews, and hooked it up in my system. And while it sounded good, it didn't have enough gain. And when I started working to increase the gain, I talked to the guy who built the preamp, and he was like, yeah, you can, it sounds like you know what you're doing, so go ahead and put a jumper across this capacitor or some resistor. I can't remember which one it was, but put a jumper wire across, these two pins, and that'll give you about another, 10 dB a gain or something like that. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was a substantial increase in the gain. So I did that, and it didn't sound as good. So I was going to have to, put it back like it was, and then get a preamp to drive the gain up high enough to get, 2 volts RMS that these integrated tube amps want to see to get the volume out of it. And I didn't want to have to do that, because that's just adding another box in the chain. And so that's when I built one of those EAR 834 clones, and that's when I learned how great those things sound. And luckily, the guy that sold me that solid state preamp, when I wrote him back and was telling him the issues I was having and stuff, he was super nice. He was like, you know what, I've got 5 people right now that want the preamp that I sold you, and I can't build them fast enough. If you want to ship it back to me, I'm happy to give you your money back, and I can sell it to somebody else. And so I was like, cool, thanks, And he said that, he may be working on one with more gain, and he realized what I was talking about. But anyway, don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But my point was that the phono stage, given that it's such a high gain device, really does make a huge difference. Now, one of the things I haven't messed with yet is the moving coil phono cartridges. And one of the reasons I haven't is obviously the phono stage that I have won't work with a MC cartridge. And from what I've read, the best way to use one of those is with a step-up transformer. And a good step-up transformer for a moving coil cartridge is pretty expensive. And I'm not real sure that it would be that big of a step up from what I'm listening to now. But again, I don't know. It's one of those things that until you try it, there may be some huge gain there that I'm not aware of. And there must be a reason people go to all that trouble to use a moving coil cartridge if there's not something there over a moving magnet cartridge. And so, and I know, to me, like a lot of things in audio, I feel like there's kind of a snake oil thing with some of this turntable stuff. And, I know people don't agree with me on the cables and stuff. And, I think there's a lot of snake oil in the cables. I think once you get past a certain kind of a threshold of some decent cables, that there's just not anything there. And while I'm sure that theoretically there is some improvement to go to a moving coil cartridge, I'm not sure that it's something that, at the end of the day, you really can hear, or that it's, cut and dry, that this one's so much better than that one. And I know that different moving magnet cartridges sound different, and this AT cartridge that I really like, it does really sound great. And the shape of the needle makes a huge difference. And so, there's stuff I think out there that really does make a difference. And I guess that's one of the things I try to do on this channel, is try to figure out what does make a difference and what doesn't. So any of you guys that have, experimented with going from like a nice, $300, $400, $500 moving magnet cartridge to like, $1,000 moving coil cartridge, and then spent the money to get a really nice step-up transformer, leave in the comments if that's something that I should look at experimenting with? Or is that one of those rabbit hole things that's like, you know, you're already at 95%, you get to 96% and spend $2,000 getting there. And that's not the kind of thing that I like doing on the channel, because I feel like that I would rather spend that money on like getting some better output transformers than those ED cores for maybe my 300B build. Like maybe try some really high-end output transformers on, you know, on a next 300B build or that kind of thing. So anyway, just kind of rambling today about some different things. But hey, that's what the Monday monologue's about, right? Just kind of killing time with you guys. So, and again, I've just got a, you know, decent Techniques belt drive turntable, and it sounds really good to me. And I've tried it compared to a cheaper one, and there definitely was an improvement. But then I tried a Music Hall 7, and I think my Techniques turntable sounds better than that Music Hall 7 did. And I know it's a lot more durable turntable too. So just because something looks kind of cool, and it had the little separate floating motor with the external belt and all that stuff, and it just didn't sound as good. So I'm not convinced that spending more money is always the answer. And sometimes the engineering that went into some of that stuff, especially back in the heyday of vinyl, probably is as good or better than any of these fancy turntables they're making today. So anyway, I think that's going to kind of wrap up the Monday monologue for this week. Hope you're enjoying this content. I'm excited to get back to work on maybe some projects that are a little easier to build. This thing was just, wow, I don't know why I was so scared of working on some of this stuff. I guess one of the things was I spent so much money on this chassis, I was scared of drilling a hole in the wrong place, and there was no way to replace this. I mean, I think this was the last one the guy had, and if I messed it up, that was it. Where, if I'm working on a $35 or $40 Hammond chassis and you drill a hole in the wrong place, it's like, oh well, put it in the scrap metal pile and go buy another one. Not a huge loss. But I mean, I think this was $150 or $175 chassis, and again, I couldn't, irreplaceable as far as I'm concerned without spending a lot more than that. So I think that's one reason that I was just a little paranoid at working on this thing. So anyway, we've talked enough about this. We're going to get on with our next project. I've got some fun stuff to jump into. I'm going to do a video soon on laying out this next push-pull amp project and see what you guys think about the different layouts. There's a couple of different ways I can go with it. And so I'm not real sure yet how I want to do it or what's going to look best. So look for that next week, and we'll see you next week for the Monday monologue.